From the capital, Palma de Mallorca, a narrow-gauge railway runs over the mountains of Serra de Tramuntana to the northern Mediterranean coast. A ride on this nostalgic train on the Spanish island of Mallorca is a great adventure for both young and old. Palma de Mallorca is the capital of an island in the Mediterranean of the same name. It is a city with a long and exciting history. After a city visit, the journey begins here. The cathedral sits high above the Parc de la Mar. La Seu, the imposing cathedral, is one of the most beautiful sacred buildings in the world, as well as being one of the most magnificent Gothic buildings on the island. Centuries of continuous construction have resulted in many artistic styles being incorporated in the building. The interior houses 20 chapels from different eras. King Jaume I had the foundation stone laid in 1230, when the island was recaptured from Moorish rule. The cathedral was originally intended to become the mausoleum for the Mallorquin royal house, and Jaume II and III are buried here. The sacred building was built on the site of an Islamic mosque. Next to the Bishop's Church is the Diocese Museo, where exhibitions are held, including worldwide collections by historical societies. To the south, adjacent to the cathedral, is the Palau de Almudaina, the King's Palace. The history of this palace reflects the city's history. Initially, it was built as the residence for the Moorish emirs. However, after the city was taken back from the Moors in 1281, King Jaume II had the palace rebuilt in Gothic style. Spiritual and secular power has always settled in close proximity. The rooms present themselves elegantly, and the palace chapel continues to indicate the deep faith of that era. The Santa Eulalia Church dominates the plaza with its bell tower and elegant neo-Gothic facade. One of the oldest places of worship in the city, built shortly after the Christians' defeat of the Moors. A short detour leads into the lower town, to the Plaça de Vila, with the Gran Hotel in Catalan Art Nouveau and the once famous Forn Bakery. Mercat de l'Olivar is the most famous and largest market hall in the city. Here, fish and crustaceans are offered freshly caught. And right next door, fresh fruit and fragrant ham and sausages. The Franciscans began building a basilica in 1281. On the foundations of a mosque with a late Gothic cloister. The interior of the one-nave church is resplendent with exuberant gold decorations and artistic carvings. Sa Loggia can be described as the cathedral of economic success. This magnificent Gothic building near the harbour served as a stock exchange for the maritime trade until 1830. The harbour of Palma is home to the yachts of the rich and beautiful, as well as humble fishing boats. small sections of the massive city wall can still be seen. The protection of the city needed to be increased. The remains of some windmills behind the city wall evoke the memories of former defensive towers. The so-called Spanish Village is located on the western outskirts of the city. In this open-air museum park are a number of typical architectural forms and characteristic buildings of Spain. Among the attractions are artistically successful reproductions of architectural gems. Each building was reconstructed in 1967, true to the original but on a smaller scale, and extensively restored in 2009. The mighty Castel de Belver, the castle of the beautiful view, overlooks the harbour area and the city. King Jaume I commissioned this fortress at the beginning of the 14th century, shortly after the conquest of the island. And so, one of the most important fortifications in Europe was built, suitable for defence, with watchtowers, ramparts and ditches. It is morning, and the old Eusebio Estrada station at Plaza España begins to fill up. A train is awaited eagerly. Passengers think that the train is ready to board. But now, the traction engine in front of the wagons changes direction, and the last cleaning of the old, well-kept wagons takes place. But then, they act fast. Passengers find their assigned carriages and seats, and peace returns. The journey with the nostalgic railway begins. From the station area, for some time, through the alleys of the suburbs. Soon, the slow train stops at the first station, Son Sardinia. From now on, the leisurely journey leads through the orchard of Mallorca, through arboriculture and past grain fields. Several times a day, the slow train mainly transports tourists through the varied landscape. On the 16th of April 1912, this railway line was put into operation, decorated with flowers and initially pulled by steam locomotives. It was not until 1929 that electrification took place, and since then the wooden wagons have been pulled by an electric locomotive. The locomotives are from the German company Siemens. The wagons came from England. The train continues to approach Serra d'Alfabia, whose mountains rise sharply and steeply from the plain. Slowly and almost unobtrusively, the train has made the first differences in altitude. It's entering the station now. The mountain village of Bunyola is located at the foot of Serra, about 18 kilometers north of Palma. The name of the place is derived from wine growing and also its superb olive oil. At the church square, the village's only two streets cross. One leads up into the mountains to Orient, the other further down to Sóller. For 100 years, the high in alcohol aperitif Paulo Tunnel, as well as the herbs schnapps Herbas, have been produced in the Distilleria Antonio Nadal. Every Saturday, a small market takes place in the square in front of the St. Matteo parish church. Otherwise, life here is very contemplative and runs unnoticed by tourism according to the rules of the seasons and the village community. Also, the train does not really bring variety into the village, as most of the tourists go onto the terminal. Thus, the station usually remains quite empty. The railway was originally intended to transport commercial and especially agricultural products from Sóller over the mountains to Palma. But from the beginning, it was also popular with the locals, and nowadays also with tourists. Next, the first tunnel, darkness and then light. Leading higher and higher, the environment changes. The rocky terrain was simply broken through to make way for the railway line. Olive plantations and mountains also accompany the trip at this altitude. "12 more tunnels will follow. The longest is 3 kilometers long. After all, more than a fifth of the total distance of 27 kilometers lies in the mountains. But the highest point should soon be reached, indicated by steep slopes. To the surprise of all the passengers, the train has stopped almost between stations. The Mirador de Puca d'Enbanya is reached, the first vantage point of the valley of Sóller, the Golden Valley. Everybody is crowding out of the carriages for joy and wants to be the first to take pictures of the overwhelming landscape. Soon, we will have to get back onto the train. The train jolts slowly, and now it's downhill. It almost seems that the nostalgia train is happy to finally come down the valley. Even if there are tunnels and bridges still to cross. Then Sóller appears up close, the capital of Tramuntana. The train has reached the terminal station. The town of Sóller situated in a wide, very sunny valley and protected by the surrounding mountains. Passing the former manor house, which became the railway station, the guests of the train descend into the city. The market is held here as in former times, and above all, the fruits from the surrounding countryside are freshly offered. And here, you can experience Mallorcan friendliness firsthand. The Sant Bartomeu Parish Church is the centre of the town. It was built in the middle of the 13th century, shortly after the Reconquista, on the site of a mosque. It was rebuilt again and again, and finally newly built at the end of the 14th century in Romanesque style. Since the population of Sóller acquired wealth by fruit growing and trade, its church also had to present itself accordingly. Today's Baroque building, with all the usual exuberant gold decorations, dates back to the 17th century. The nave contains 14 chapels and a Baroque main altar by sculptor Johann Anthony Homs. The city's history is very interesting. The cultivation of citrus fruits and figs also brought problems. The fresh goods had to be brought quickly to the markets of Palma, but the mountain roads and the weather, especially in winter, were often a hindrance. Oranges were an export success because vitamin C had been discovered for good health at the beginning of the 20th century. This is how the plan for a rail link across the mountains to Palma was drawn up, and the citizens jointly financed the realization of this idea. They had to raise 3.5 million pesetas, an unimaginable amount of money back then, and each family bought some shares. The transport of goods and people functioned perfectly, and when new roads began to replace the railways, there arose the great tourist adventure. But before that, in the middle of the 19th century, another problem. Pests infested the orange plantations. Many inhabitants had to emigrate and settled in southern France, Spain and the Caribbean, and later returned to their homeland as wealthy people. This explains the French Catalan flair of this city behind the mountains. The other attraction of the city announces itself, the so-called Orange Express, an old tramway that connects Sóller with the port. Dating back to 1913, the tram crosses the main square in the middle and then climbs down slightly before going uphill to the railway station, where it is recoupled. Then the passengers are finally allowed to board, and off we go for the second part of this adventure. Past the small tables of cafes and the main square, where even in Central Europeans' winter, everyone is sitting outside, enjoying the fresh open air and the sunshine. Past also numerous building facades, some old, some new. Phoenicians and Greeks settled in the valley, and the Romans turned Port de Sóller into a commercial port. The Moors finally transformed the area with its ingenious irrigation systems into a paradisiacal orchard. Like a mighty wall, the Tramuntana mountain range stretches about 90 kilometers along the northwestern coast. A mountain range rising more than 1,000 meters. It stops the cold north wind coming from the Spanish mainland. Also in winter, there is a climate which favors the cultivation of citrus fruits. However, the railway to Palma did not yet exist. The pass roads were often difficult to cross, and the fruit had to be delivered as quickly as possible. A solution had to be found. The delicious fruits were to be delivered from the old port directly to southern France by ship, and from there to Germany. Soon, trade began to flourish, and from the profit, the citizens built elaborate houses in Sóller and had the tram built to the Port de Sóller harbour. The distance was only 4 kilometers, but this kind of transport made everything much easier and faster. The route of the nostalgic tramway ends in the harbour. Some passengers disembark, while others return to Sóller to take the train back to Palma de Mallorca. It's fascinating to suddenly see an attractive tramway passing by the beach next to the palm trees. Port de Sóller has long since ceased to be the sleepy fishing village of bygone days. In the 1960s, tourism discovered this coastal village and adapted it for its purposes. All started with the French. As the first here, they learned to appreciate the tranquility of the bay, where restrained elegance is strongly reminiscent of the south of France. But the natural harbour basin had already been appreciated by the Romans. From here, they practiced active trade in the entire Western Mediterranean area. But later, there were also terrible things to report. North African pirates learned of this prosperity, and on the 11th of May, 1561, they attacked with 23 ships, and 1,600 men stormed ashore to plunder and murder. Only after fierce resistance by the inhabitants were they forced to flee, but the harbour was in ruins. Today, at the end of the tramway, is the spacious Marina, the slopes packed full of luxurious houses. To explore the island of Mallorca by train and tramway over mountains and valleys is still fun. Today, the nostalgic railways continue to transport passengers from Palma de Mallorca to Port de Sóller. A very special experience.